Hey, in a previous video that I did, I talked about 4 reasons why I think that you should not get a Nord drum. In today's video, I'm going to talk about a couple of reasons why I think that you should get a Nord drum. Over the past year or so with me making videos about the Nord drum, I've read a lot of criticisms about the Nord drum, and I wanted to talk about the top criticisms that I always see coming up and why I think that those particular criticisms actually make the Nord drum a better device, and a couple of other reasons why I think that the Nord drum is just an awesome device in 2024 and why I think that you should get the device in 2024. So, you know what I'm saying. Okay, here's reason number one, and it's about the lack of individual outputs. On the back of the Nord drum, you just have stereo out. And as far as I know, you are unable to route differently to the headphones. If there's a way that you can do that, please let me know. I don't think that it's really a big deal that you just have the two outputs. I'm gonna address this in two different ways. First, I'm just gonna talk about the practicality of it and why I don't think that it really matters. And then two, I'll address a workaround that I think sort of fixes the issue. And then also, I think that it sort of inspires creativity because there's a limitation. But let me talk about the practicality aspect of it, or why I don't think that it matters. A lot of times I'll hear people talk about the issue and they'll say something about performance. And I'm thinking about different performers that I've seen with the Nord drum. One of the examples that comes to mind is Bonobo. I saw Bonobo back in 2022 in Philadelphia. I was like super stoked that I saw the Nord drum on stage. And at no point in time was I ever like, oh man, this performance would be so much better if there was individual outputs on the Nord drum. I don't think anybody was sort of feeling that. I found this screenshot from Bonobo's Instagram, and it's a crowd, and off to the left-hand side, you can see the Nord drum. Also, you can see this audience of people. And maybe it's silly, but I just sort of was thinking like, does the crowd care that there's not individual outputs for all the 6 different channels? Did it change their reception of the performance? I don't think it did. You know, I mean, that's just me. Another example that I'm thinking of is Dami and JD Beck at the Nord booth at NAMM in 2020. And there's a bunch of people watching them perform, and it's just JD Beck on the Nord drum, nothing else. And you can look at the people in the crowd and they're just like really captivated by the talent that both of them have. And again, I don't think anybody was like, oh gosh, this would sound so much better if you get what I'm saying? Okay, one more example that I've seen. The drummer from a band called The National, it looks like he's got a Nord drum set up next to the rest of his drum kit. So sort of a different example where Bonobo is using all electronic instruments. JD Beck is just using the Nord drum as the main device. And then the drummer from The National is using the Nord drum as a supplement, so maybe percussion or wild sounds. I don't know. I don't even know what their music sounds like. There's a cool photo on their page where they're playing at Red Rocks Theater, Amphitheater, whatever it's called. And there's just like a crowd of people and you can see like the moon in the background. This is a cool photo. And it's neat to see the Nord drum out in the wild like that. Same thing. I don't think anybody in that crowd cared about the individual outputs, and I don't think that it matters. And as far as live performance goes, if you have a live sound engineer, they're gonna have tools where they're gonna be able to isolate certain things and they're gonna be able to get it to sound as good as possible. So in those 3 different scenarios that I'm talking about, you've got the Nord drum amongst other electronic instruments, you have the Nord drum as just a drum kit, the primary drum kit, and then in the last example, the Nord drum as a supplement. And I think that you can get away with that on stage for performance with just the 2 outputs. And I don't know how they set that up whenever any of those folks played, but I would say that throwing your low end to the left and throwing your high end to the right, or whichever order feels more comfortable for you, is probably sufficient. Okay, now before anybody yells at me, I understand that there are some folks who really enjoy processing individual outputs. And for that, I might say the Nord drum probably isn't the best device for that because you're only gonna get the 2. And I think that that's fine, and it leads me on to why I think that the 2 outputs, or only having 2 outputs, is a pro versus it being a con for the device. I've done a ton of jams and quick little videos and shorts and reels and all that sort of stuff. I've produced an album with the Nordrum, and I have found that the limitation has inspired me more than it's hindered me. And I think that it sort of inspires a sort of a creativity because more happy accidents happen. What I do is I will take all of my low end, I throw it to the left. So if you're talking about like a kick drum or a sub sound or something like that, it goes to the left. And then if I'm doing something that's more high end, like a hi-hat or a snare drum or some sort of percussion thing that's a little bit more high end, I throw it to the right. And then I get 2 tracks in Ableton, right? My low end and then my high end. And I just process those 2, right? And that has been enough of a creative playground for me to be able to get lost without wasting time. Hopefully that makes sense. The 2 outputs is a pro because it limits the choices that you're able to make, but I think that it gives you enough flexibility where you can do the things that you need to do. If you do need to get a little bit more granular, I have a workaround for this. So let's take an example. You have a kit that you built and it's a kick drum, it's a hi-hat, and then it's a snare drum. You throw your kick drum over to the left or the right, wherever you want it, and then your hi-hat and your snare, you throw it over to the right. And you want to be able to separate the hi-hat from the snare drum. You could use something like Ableton's EQ3, which has like a crossover control, and you can sort of dial it in. And what you could do is you could find right where the body or the majority of the hi-hat is at and where the majority of the snare is at, and just set it right there. Duplicate those tracks, turn the snare drum off in the hi-hat track, and then turn the hi-hat off in the snare drum track. Now, you're gonna get some crosstalk. There's gonna be a little bit of hi-hat in the snare drum track, and there's gonna be a little bit of snare inside of the hi-hat track. But you're gonna be able to process those individual things so you can beef up the snare drum if you want, or throw a compressor on it and get the most out of it. And then whenever you unsolo everything, you'll be able to process most of that. I've used it, it works. For me, that's been more than enough. But if you feel that you need to get a device that has individual outputs, I have some suggestions for you. The Alessi Strike Multi-Pad Percussion Pad. That's a lot of pad in there, the word pad. The Strike Multi-Pad has a left and right output, and then it also has an auxiliary left and right. And I'm assuming that you could probably route to each one of those. So you get 4 outputs there. The Roland SPD SX Pro sampling pad, that looks like that has 4 balanced outputs as well as the master left and right. So I'm assuming, I don't know how it works because I've not read the manual, but 6, right? That gives you 6 outputs. And then the new Korg MPS 10 drum percussion and sampler pad, that looks like that also has the left and right output as well as a sub 1 and 2 out. So you would get 4. Okay, so if that's something that you need, then you could probably go for those devices, use that as your primary device. However, I'm gonna stick with the Nordrum because it works for me. And I think it'll work for you. Okay. Okay, the number two complaint that I hear about the Nordrum is the kick pedal and how it shares the number 1 pad. So you sort of lose a pad. I don't think that this is really that big of a deal. I'll explain why I don't think it's a big deal, and then I'll explain why I think that this is a positive thing. So for one, if you look at the Nordrum compared to other drum pads, it is a really slick design. Like, I think that it's like one of the best minimalist designs. It looks really, really good. And I think if they were to add another track, they would have to add a little number 7 on the far right side. And if you are somebody who is maybe like a marching band type drummer, or like you're like a marimba player and then you get into the Nordrum, you may not even want a kick pedal. And so you have on the design this extra channel that you end up not using. Yeah, maybe you could like run another pad out to a different thing. That would be sort of cool. I think that because the Nordrum is such a slick design, it inspires you to like want to play with it and dig deeper into it. You don't get lost in menus because it's just so like straightforward. It's like right there. And I think that maybe it would take away from the device. The kick drum thing sort of takes me to a bigger theme around the complaints of the Nordrum. And it's that folks are sort of looking at the Nordrum as a drum replacement instead of its own thing, which is a drum synthesizer. I'm sort of thinking of this comparison of like a piano and somebody who has always played piano, and they get their first synthesizer and they are wanting the synthesizer to be like the piano instead of the synthesizer being its own thing. And I think that if you can make that sort of mental change in your head, then the Nord drum becomes its own special thing. It can be an acoustic drum replacement, but it's so much more than that. It's a 6-part synthesizer. It's a 6-part mono synth, and that's really cool. For example, right, on a piano, they've got the like 1, 2, 3 like little pedals at the bottom. I know that one of them, when you hold it, it holds the note out. I don't know what the other 2 ones do. But for instance, if you were like a first-time synthesizer player and you're like, where are my 3 pedal things at? Well, you know, maybe you probably don't need it because there's so much more that the synth can do. With that being said, let's talk about the kick drum being on pad 1. It allows you to do things like this. When you have a traditional drum set, I guess you could sort of like hit it with the drumstick. I've seen people do that. That's weird. It's sort of gimmicky, but like you could sort of in theory do something like that, but you're not going to be able to be like brrr, and then use your feet at the same time. You could do a kick pedal, but do you see what I'm saying? It eliminates the need for you to have 2 kick pedals. And this is why I think that this is a pro, because now it enables you to do things that are very different from the traditional drum kit, which is cool because then you're more likely to find new possibilities. So I don't really see it as a con. I see it as a positive, that it's an opportunity to explore things in a different way. And if you want to be able to have, you know, a more traditional feel like that, then you probably want to go with like the Roland device. But this is the Nord drum. Number 3 is the hi-hat. And this is sort of piggybacking off of 2 with the kick drum thing. A lot of folks complain that it doesn't have a hi-hat input so that you can't like do the choke with it, I'm assuming is what folks want. You just simply don't need it. You can dynamically control the amp envelope or the decay by how hard you hit it. And that's just a learning curve. I think that you can just sort of figure out like how to have like open hat, closed hat, open hat, closed hat. Or you put your closed hat and then your open hat on pads right next to each other, and then you put them on a mute group, and then you just sort of go back and forth. Yeah, you're losing a pad, so then you could go in the other direction and you could just use the dynamic control. You don't necessarily need to use all 6 pads to create a whole drum kit. You could just make a minimalist kit. I think that that's another plus for the device, that it's a minimal device. It already has enough stuff coming out the back of it. There's too many cables on the back of the Nord drum. It doesn't need a hi-hat thing. Like, just go, I could see why folks want this, but ultimately I think that it's not necessary. And I think that the minimalist parts of the Nord drum is what makes it shine. And I think that if you're not thinking of it as a drum kit replacement, but that you're thinking of it as a drum synthesizer, then it opens you up to more creative opportunities. It's just my opinion. Do what you want. Go get the Roland thing. Number 4. This is just a general reason why I think that the Nord drum is great. This is a great first synthesizer for a drummer. Let me explain. I can remember whenever I first got involved with my first hardware synth, which was the OG Minilog, and I remember having an experience with it like, oh my gosh, this thing can make sounds that no other instrument that I've ever played with, it seems like it's endless. And I really enjoyed that. But I'm not really a key player. I'm a drummer, and so there was a limitation that was there. Whereas I think that maybe a classically trained piano player or something like that, a key player, first interacting with the synth might have a way deeper experience with the synth because they can already play and they have an understanding of harmony and where to put their fingers. I lost a little bit of that as being a drummer who's somebody who's not really great at keys. And yeah, if you're doing sound design, you could just be like bop and then play with stuff, and you could do that, and that's cool too. However, if you're a drummer and you're looking at getting your first synth, this is the best synth to get because you can take all of your drumming experience and play into the 6 mono synths that is the Nord drum. The Nord drum is set up in such a simple way. It's so clean that I think that it's really easy to start wrapping your brain around how these different things work. You may not even know that you're messing with an envelope. You don't necessarily need to know those terms, and maybe that'll translate whenever you go to another hardware synth, understanding that dynamics on the Nord drum is velocity on a keyboard synth, right? Those are cool ways to work with those concepts, but with the skills that you already have as a drummer. Also, just like I was saying, as the piano player going to the synth, the drummer going to the Nord drum, there's all these different possibilities of sounds that you're able to create. I think it's just the best first synth for a drummer. Okay? All right. Here's reason number 5 why I think that you should get a Nord drum, and it's that I don't think that you need a lot of music theory or any music theory to be able to create unique or interesting music with it. About a year ago, I did a 30-day challenge where I just tried to make a track with the Nord drum every day for 30 days. And with those 6 pads, I was sort of surprised at how much I was able to get out. I think I got a little bit of a lesson of less is more with the Nord drum, that I didn't need to have all of this different production going on, that I could create something really, really cool and dynamic with just 6 pads. Sometimes I was just exploring, and because you're not working in notes, but you're working in numbers, and yeah, you could, make a mind map of like, oh, 60 is the note C or whatever it is for the pitch. Sometimes it's just cool to just like throw it around. And the fact that the pitch goes in quarter steps instead of half steps, you can get these in between sounds, and then it starts opening up your mind to like, I'm just gonna like make some noise with the Nord drum. And I think that that is some of the places where some of the coolest stuff comes out of it, where you just sort of like tweak around, just keep on hitting and turning stuff. Okay, those are just my opinions. And if you have a different opinion and a philosophy around it, then you're probably right and you got to do what's right for you. But that's just me. That's just me personally. Ultimately, my purpose in bringing this up is to just prevent folks from feeling like they need to buy something new so that they can create art or make something that's meaningful for them or to have fun. I think that for some folks, myself included, we've established a hobby around looking at tech specs and finding out what a device can do and being upset about its limitations, while there's somebody else who's just like making music with the device and having fun, and they're not thinking about that sort of stuff. My point in bringing all this up is not to say that somebody's wrong. It's just to sort of encourage people to not spend money, to lean into the items that they already have around them and maybe feel more encouraged to go interact with them again with a different mindset instead of spending money to be able to have fun. Okay, all right. Speaking of the Nord drum, I dropped an album a year ago called Precipice, and that album is 90% Nord drum. There's a little bit of some other stuff in there, but maybe take a listen to it. It's on Bandcamp. I have a link for it down there, and you can hear what I was able to do with just 2 tracks. So I don't know, maybe that's interesting, maybe not. Either way, I hope that you have a good day. And if you know of a way to get the audio signal to the headphone output as well as the, like if you can route them in separate ways, then please let me know how to do that, because that would make my life a little bit easier. I would appreciate the 4th input, but I'm not going to sell the Nord drum, you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make that big of a difference.